When you're analyzing real estate data, there's a constant fight between the quality of the data that you use and the quantity of the data that you use. So in this video, we're going to talk about those two things and how to come up with a happy median so that the data you're analyzing is actually going to give you the results that you're looking for. Hey, what's up? It's Jeff with Property Brain, and in this video, I want to talk to you about quantity versus quality of data and what that means when you're analyzing real estate statistics. There's a constant fight in real estate data between quality of the data and the quantity of the data. And by that I mean, if you're looking for things that are really similar overall, you're not going to have a lot of them. You're going to have quality, but you're not really going to have quantity. And on the other side, if you're looking for a lot of data, you're not going to have a lot of similarity, meaning you're not going to have a lot of quality. This constant battle can impact the quality of the results that you get when you're doing an analysis on that data. So we're going to talk about those two scenarios and ultimately how to have a happy median to get you the best quality of analysis possible when looking at the data. So let's jump in and take a look at the first scenario, which is high quality but low quantity. This is a scenario where you've got very similar properties, but you probably don't have that many. For example, let's say you're looking for a 2-story design home with 3,500 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and you look for only properties that meet that criteria. It's only that design style, it's right about that square footage, it's only those bedrooms, bathrooms in your subject's neighborhood. You're not likely going to have very many results, but the results that you have are going to be very high quality. This is a typical case when you're picking comparables as a real estate agent and you're finding properties that are very similar, but you don't have very many of them to go on. A lot of times this comes down to you find maybe 1 or 2 properties and you're basing your entire analysis around that. And while that might be great that those two are very similar, when you take a step back and you're looking at the overall data analysis of what's happening in that market, what's happening for other homes, those 1 or 2 don't really give you enough to go on when it comes to analyzing the actual data for that market area. So what are the pros and cons of this? First, let's start with the pros. First, it can give you a really good idea of what is happening in price over time. One of the biggest issues when looking at what's happening in a changing market is the fact that sometimes you're actually looking at different homes selling than homes selling for a different price. So let's say, for example, you look at a market and you say, man, it seems like the home prices have gone up 5 or 10%. The one question you really need to ask yourself is, did prices actually go up 5 or 10%? Or did just different homes sell that sold for 5 or 10% more? So when you're looking at a very low quantity of data but with high quality, it's likely that you can see a little bit better picture and price changes over time, especially if they're spread out pretty evenly. So say you've got 12 months of data and you've got 5 sales and they happened every couple months, you can easily see what happened with those homes over the course of that 12 months. It also allows you to calculate adjustments on the property pretty well, because ultimately if you're basing adjustments on the statistics that come from homes that are nearly identical, you're likely to get adjustments that are calculated really accurate for that property. So then what's the cons of this type of approach? The biggest con is the fact that you don't have much data. So when you're looking at things from a statistical standpoint, you don't have a lot of data to back up whatever conclusions you get. So if you're looking at price changes over time and you only have 4 or 5 data points, it makes it a little bit harder to be confident that the statistics that are resulting from that are actually accurate. The same is true when you're looking at making adjustments. If you're breaking down those couple homes and getting the adjustments from it, while they might be accurate in the fact that they are from similar homes, they're not really statistically supportable in the aspect that there's just so few of them. The biggest problem comes with potential outliers. Let's say you have 5 homes and one of those sold for significantly more or significantly less. In that case, that one outlier could really change the market and it could really skew your time adjustments or other adjustments that are being calculated from the data because of a unique scenario. Maybe somebody just was really tied to that house, or there was something about it that made them overpay or underpay. And so in that case, that one piece of data or 2 pieces of data could drastically change the market because they have a much larger impact due to the minimal amount of data that is in that data set. All right, so let's talk about the other scenario. First, we looked at high quality and low quantity. The next option is the exact opposite. It's high quantity and low quality. This is when you look at a lot of properties in an area, but you're not really narrowing it down to make sure that they're similar. This would be a similar approach to what a lot of AVMs use. They're looking at a really broad data set and they're trying to use their algorithms to narrow it down to come up with the actual price of a property that falls within there. Maybe they're running calculations to figure out if there should be square footage adjustments or other adjustments. But the problem with this type of data set is that you're basing it on a ton of different types of homes. So when you're looking at this quantity of data, you lose the quality of data. For example, this would be if you did a home search within 1 mile of your subject property, you included all design types, all square footage, all bedroom and bathroom and garage count, and you got, let's say, 500 results instead of 5 in the previous scenario. What are the pros of this? A larger data set can make it easier to actually run statistics. If you're using some type of data analysis like a regression or something like that, it becomes a little bit more supportable in the fact that you have more data points going into the analysis, and therefore theoretically you would get a better result. However, because we're looking at low quality, sometimes that can be skewed a bit. So we'll talk about that here in a second with the cons. The second pro is that outliers have a lot less impact. If you have 1 or 2 properties that sell way above or way below where everything else falls, but you have 500 total properties, those couple data points have almost no impact. So you don't have to worry about those skewing the data in a way that would be confusing. Okay, so those are the pros, but what are the cons? We already hit on one a little bit. When you're looking at this amount of data and you don't have a lot of quality, the problem becomes that anything that you calculate from it, while it might be a little bit more statistically supportable that you had so much data and so many data points that went into the analysis, one of the problems is that what that data analysis shows may or may not actually represent your subject property. For example, let's talk about the time adjustment thing we were talking about earlier. When you had the 5 things in the high quality, low quantity segment, and we said that if they were spaced out evenly, you could get a pretty good picture of, did the price increase over time? Did it decrease over time? What happened to it? In this scenario, you're gonna look at, let's say, 500 data points. You might be able to get a very good trend line that shows that the market's increasing or decreasing. But what we don't know is, were those homes that led to the increase or decrease similar homes that ultimately sold for more or less? Or is it just that within that market area, different types of homes sold? So for example, if we were looking at that 3,500 square foot 3-bed, 2-bath, in the first data set, we had all of them were that. So if we saw that prices went up over time, we could be confident the market had actually increased, that people were willing to pay more for that same house. However, in the second scenario, if we look and say prices have increased 5%, let's say, maybe just bigger homes sold. Remember, we didn't narrow it down to square footage or garage count or bedroom or bathroom count or anything like that. So it's a potential that maybe at the beginning of the time frame, some smaller homes were selling, and at the end of the time frame, some bigger homes were selling, and it had actually more to do with the type of home or size of home that sold over time rather than homes actually appreciating. So in that scenario, having too many data points can actually confuse it and make it seem like maybe prices are changing, when in reality, maybe it was just different homes were selling. All right, so now that we've looked at both of those, let's talk about how to find the perfect mix, right? You have to figure out what the best market is to be able to analyze the data. And like I said, this is something that you're always going to struggle with. When you sit down and do a comp search, you're either going to tend to fall one way or the other. And if it comes down to it and you have to pick a direction, it's better to fall in the way of high quality and low quantity than high quantity and low quality. I think everyone in real estate knows when you look at stuff like Zillow or other resources that estimate what the value of a property is, that are looking at these massive data sets and running these complex algorithms, that most times they're not extremely accurate. And again, the reason for that is because they're looking at so many unique scenarios that it's hard to estimate whether or not those inputs actually have any significance on the subject property itself. Okay, so again, as you do your comp search, if you need to fall one way or the other, we'd recommend that you fall towards high quality, low quantity, rather than high quantity, low quality. However, the goal would be to get a good median. How do you do that? When you're doing a comp search, whether you're trying to just analyze a market area or whether you're trying to price an actual property, the best thing to do is to start really narrow. So let's take the example of the 3,500 square foot 3-bed, 2-bath. Maybe you're going to start out and you're going to draw in boundaries for your neighborhood. And And you're going to look for 2-story design homes that are 3 or 4 bedrooms with 2 or 3 bathrooms and are between 3,300 and 3,700 square feet. And you're going to see what that data set gives you. Now, likely that's going to be a pretty small data set. So then from there, what we want to do is you want to branch out to make sure that you're getting everything that the typical buyer for that house would consider. Your job is to sit down and say, if you were showing that house to a buyer, what else would they consider? Would they consider a 3,100 square foot 2-story with 2 bedrooms, 2 baths? If they would, maybe you should add that to the data set. If they'd consider a 4,000 square foot house with 4 or 5 bedrooms, maybe you should add that to the data set. Would they consider a rancher? Maybe they go a 3-bed, 2-bath around that same square foot, but they would consider a rancher or a tri-level or a bi-level or some other design style. Or maybe there's a neighborhood that's very nearby that they would also consider that's similar overall property values, similar quality homes. And so you could expand your search gradually to get a little bit more data while still trying to keep the quality as high as possible. So in this scenario, what you're trying to look for ideally is somewhere between 50 and 200 results. It's going to give you enough data to run the statistics on it while not giving you so much that it's going to be confusing. Generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, we like to shoot for around 120. That would give you approximately 10 per month, which ultimately becomes a pretty good data set to analyze so that you're not letting outliers influence the data set, but you have enough properties to really use that statistical analysis to make sure that you're getting good calculations based upon the inputs. Now, that's not always going to happen. Sometimes you're going to have 20 or 30, and sometimes you're going to have 200 or 250, and that's fine. Ultimately, you want to make sure that you've got good data. So again, remember, if you've got to fall one way or the other, if you've got to choose between having 50 that are high quality or 300 that are semi-low quality, that there's a big gap or a big range between the types and prices of properties, then you want to fall maybe more towards the 50 because it's going to give you a better overall input or a better idea of how those changes in price, changes in square footage, any of that sort of stuff actually impacted your subject property. But if you can get to that 100, 120, 150 range without significant outliers, it's going to give you the best overall analysis possible, and it's going to result in adjustments or calculations that you can be really confident in. How do you know if you're on track? I know we've talked about the number, shooting for that 120 range, but how else do you know if you're on track? The first thing you can look at is what is the range in sold prices? Are there outliers? So first, let's talk about range in sold prices. If you look and you say the typical house is selling for $500,000 and the top of my range is really $575 and the bottom's $475 or something like that, and you've got a relatively tight range, you might have a high quality data set. That's where you want to look and say, okay, once I feel good about my quality of data set, how's my quantity? Is it big enough and can I expand it? If you plot the sales on a graph, what you ideally see is that all the sales are concentrated pretty tightly around the trend line so that you don't have a significant range, and prices may be changing over time. So you may have a range, let's say from 450 to 550 over the course of a year, but they would be close to the trend line throughout that process. So the 550 wouldn't technically be around the same time of year that the 450 was. Maybe it was later in the year because there was an increase in price, or earlier in the year because there was a decrease in price. So that's one good visual way to know if you're on track. If you've got high quality of data, is to plot them on a chart to see when they sold and what they sold for, and then look at how that distribution is in comparison to a high concentration around that trend line. The second thing you want to look for is to see, are there many outliers? It's one thing to have a couple outliers. Most times it's going to be really hard to avoid having that in your data set. But what you don't want to do is have a lot of outliers. Ultimately, if you have enough data, having a few outliers won't actually impact the trend analysis. But if you have a lot of outliers, they will impact it. The things you really want to look for when it comes to outliers is if they fall at the beginning or end of a period. So let's say you're looking at a 12-month time frame. If you have an outlier at the beginning or the end that's either significantly high or significantly low, it's going to affect the outcome when you analyze it mathematically. It's going to shift the trend line in a direction towards that outlier. So when you plot all your data points onto a graph and you see that concentration and whether it's close to the trend line, you also want to look and see, are there any outliers specifically at the beginning or the end of a time period. And if there are, you would ideally want to remove those from your data set by either changing your search criteria or manually removing them depending upon what you're doing to actually run the analysis. And that way, those outliers won't have a significant influence. If they fall somewhere in the middle, it's unlikely they're going to have any significant impact. So you can be pretty confident that the quality of that analysis will be pretty good because you have a good quality data set overall, even though you have some of those outliers. All right, so in conclusion, I hope that you have a little bit better understanding of the quality versus quantity issue. And like I said, anytime you do a comp search, you're going to face this issue. It's just the nature of real estate data. Homes are different. People spend different amounts of money on them for different reasons. And in certain markets, it seems to make more sense. On other ones where prices are rapidly increasing or decreasing, sometimes it can get really confusing as to why people made the decisions that they made. However, by being able to analyze the properties and look to create a market data set that is good enough quantity, but focuses on the quality, you're gonna make sure that you have the best overall analysis possible to get you the results that you want. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you found some of this information helpful. If you did, I'd love it if you'd hit the like button. And while you're at it, go ahead and follow us on some of your favorite social media channels to make sure that you can connect with us, where we can answer questions and just get to know you a little bit. Thanks again for watching the video, and we'll see you in the next one.